Hey, what's up guys? Gons here for the Face Like the Sun YouTube channel. We're keeping an eye on technology, and we're about to hit the fourth industrial revolution. By 2020, which is less than 4 years away, we should see some pretty radical changes, or at least the building of those changes put in place into society, things being deployed, infrastructure being built. And one of the things that we'll see is the robot revolution. Now, robots have been a part of public consciousness for a long time because robots have been in stories, and now with the last century, it's been movies, TV shows, things like that. And that has significance in itself in that it wasn't until the television, media, technology explosion era where science fiction with robots is, just a huge part of everything. And obviously The Matrix, Terminator, they had these different points of time where the public was conditioned for the reality of a robot revolution. And I'm sure many of you can think of hundreds of movies way before Terminator, obviously, that had robots in them as part of the storyline, the ethical, moral, psychological, philosophical questions that arise when interacting with a humanoid, especially a humanoid robot. Sometimes they mess with, non-humanoid forms of robots, and, that ties into aliens and everything else. But for this video, I want to show you that the robots are really coming. It's not just this idea that we see in books, magazines, TV shows, films, that kind of stuff. We're now talking about robots as part of society, as part of the way we interact on a daily basis. Now, a lot of us out here in the West, in America, we have already been conditioned. You're probably watching this video on an iPhone or an Android phone of some kind. So this is already taking place. I'm not saying anything that's crazy, right? I mean, if it was 10 years ago and I was saying this, like the robots are coming in 4 or 5 years, you guys might have thought, yeah, he's kind of nuts. But if you really think about it, the interaction with your smartphone, smart being, a form of intelligence that you're able to interact with, these are all the things that are coming about. And one of the ethical issues is having a human form to a robot. The question is something sacred in the form of humans, the head, the eyes, the face, the human body, are these parts sacred? The shape of it, the form of it. And that's a good question. And, some philosophies and religions don't put an emphasis on that. They say, no, we're all the same stuff, right? A lot of the new agey kind of perspectives say we're all the same stuff. And on one level, that's true in that, we're all made up of the same particles and atoms and everything else. Different combinations create different structures at, the level or scale that we experience life. But that's apart from the discussion of, is it sacred? And in my personal opinion, I think the human form is sacred, not just in some sort of geometrical or sort of new agey way. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about God created us in his image. We are made in the image of God. So being human means to be an imager of God. And that's something that we inherited, all of us. And the question and the biggest thing that's happening now is the beginning of humanity abandoning that reality, which leads to the inability of someone to be redeemed or saved. God came as a man to save humanity. If you abandon your humanity, you can no longer be saved. Quite simple. So as we fulfill the Great Commission and evangelism, this is the first time that we've had to deal with something like the machine or the robot entering the equation in part of this whole discussion about salvation. And when that happens, obviously there are different philosophical directions people take. And one of those directions is to abandon humanity, basically to become what these folks believe is more than human, right? They'll phrase it as human 2.0, human plus. You're giving up part of your humanity. Basically, you're giving up part of what you were created to be as imagers of God, and you're accepting what I think Revelation 13 talks about, the image of the beast. I mean, this point's been made over and over and over again on this channel. Revelation 13, the image of the beast, the mark of the beast. These passages, I think, just clearly involves this phenomenon that we're seeing right before our eyes with robots and machines and AI and all this. So let me go through a few of these stories. And I'm not going to spend too much time on each one because there's a lot. And there's been a huge influx of robot stories just recently. And I think, again, this is just part of getting us ready because it's about to happen. Reuters.com reported robot monk blends science and Buddhism at Chinese temple. Basically, there's a 60 centimeter or about a 2-foot tall robot resembling a cartoon-like novice monk. And basically, he spits out wisdom and interacts with people and Well, there you have it. You have the first robot Buddhist monk. Okay, so I mean, who knows if this is just a little trend, but imagine Buddhist temples in China starting to be flooded with these robots. Obviously, machine entering into a religious space, right, with the Buddhist temple. I mean, this is where it all begins, It's just crazy that this is a story out there. And again, we don't know if this particular robot is, the robot that will ultimately lead to the image. Probably not, but, it's more plausible to consider in this climate here. And it brings up a question in my mind. How many of these big-time churches are going to start implementing technology at a much more profound level? I mean, I already saw this working at a semi-mega church, how they were on the cutting edge. They had all this money to spend on, big items of technology that they didn't even know how to use, right? They just buy it and then it sits there and doesn't do anything. I've seen that happen. So, there's that level of it. But with robots, interaction, artificial intelligence stuff coming into the church, I mean, what's that going to look like? It's just going to be very interesting to see how this all unfolds. The Economist published an article called "Who Wields the Knife? A Machine Carries Out an Operation Almost Unaided." And again, I mean, this is a long time coming. Surgery, very precise movements, incisions that need to be made in small spaces and in tight spaces in the body. A machine would be great for this. There's obviously lots of positive things to take out of, a machine or a robot doing the surgery in terms of, the actual cuts and stuff. And the good news is that the courtrooms still have sort of power or jurisdiction over how much these things would spread around. But the bad news is that the courtroom has the power to deploy or, have these sorts of technologies become the norm, if you get my drift here. So a story like this just goes to show it's there. It's definitely a topic or a reality at play. Obviously, the machine can go haywire and it can just, something terrible can happen and, you can make terrible, scary horror movies out of it. And I think, part of the genre of robots and machines and everything else in the apocalyptic sense has done that, with a lot of movies. But it's that difficult challenge of how do we deal with it? Do we take the good with the bad? Because the bad ultimately, if you go down that road, leads to human extinction. And that's sort of why, those movies and stuff have been at play. The technology section of the Financial Times reported, "Meet the Cobots, humans and robots together on the factory floor." And look at this guy. Yeah, this happy robot putting his arm around a guy. There is a level of humor in this, by the way. I keep laughing at this stuff because it's just so absurd at a certain level. I hope you guys are tracking with me on that. I'm not making fun of the situation. Obviously, these are all very serious topics, but, you kind of have to have a light heart about it because, it really is kind of funny at a certain level. So, in any case, here's the story. It's causing joy for the workers. This guy, Jürgen Heidemann, says, "Everything is just where I need it. I don't have to lift up the heavy parts. It's wonderful. The robot does all the heavy lifting, basically. This is more satisfying because I am making a whole system. I only did one part of the process in the old line." Well, there you have it. It's great. More production, right? But here's the problem, Mr. Heidemann. Eventually, they're not going to need you anymore. They're not going to need you to be there to run these things. The machine will do it itself. So keep that in mind as we go through some of the things that we're facing right before our eyes with this robot revolution, and it's very serious. The National Geographic, "Rise of the Robots is sparking an investment boom." All the money's being poured into robots, folks, and it really does start to shade some of the things we read about in Revelation 13, but Revelation 17 and 18 as well, with merchants and everything else. These types of passages might mean something completely different to us who are living through this. These domestic robots keep busy at the Korea Institute of Science and Technology. One makes toast, while the appropriately attired bot at right awaits to deliver the toast to a human. So they have little jobs, different jobs here for robots. And let me read a little bit more for you here. San Francisco, an army of robots is on the move in warehouses, hospitals, and retail stores, and on city streets, industrial parks, and the footpaths of college campuses. The first representatives of this new invading force are starting to become apparent. Quote, "The robots are among us," end quote, says Steve Jervston, a Silicon Valley investor and director at Elon Musk's Tesla and SpaceX companies, which have relied heavily on robotics. A multitude of machines will follow, he says. Quote, a lot of people are going to come in contact with robots in the next 2 to 5 years, end quote. The arrival of the robots and their potentially devastating effect on human employment has been widely predicted. Now the machines are starting to roll or walk out of the labs. In the process, they are about to tip off a financing boom as robotics and artificial intelligence becomes one of the hottest new markets in tech. There you have it, folks. It's pretty much admitting to everything we've been tracking for years. The way this was written was pretty fascinating as well, how they're literally coming out of the labs into the streets. This is the robot revolution. It's really happening, folks. This isn't a joke anymore. This isn't just science fiction. We're going to start seeing massive social changes because of robots. And this is why I make these videos. I don't know why more people aren't talking about it, but here we go. We have unemployment issues as one of the things that will be on the forefront. But in the tech industry, in terms of investment, the rich get richer, right? The rich get richer and they control the robots. This is part of the New World Order, folks. Welcome to the new age, right? Welcome to the New World Order. These folks that have been trying to do this, robots play a huge part in it. And I think it's a topic that has been underestimated in terms of its reality in underpinning the technocracy. So here we see it. It's happening. It's coming upon us. And the ties to Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX, I've made videos about it in the past and how Elon Musk and just all the strangeness there with SpaceX, a company that's trying to get people into space for cheap. You know, this is part of the transhumanist dream. Okay, put aside, you know, all the prideful comments or whatever concerning the shape of the earth or what's above us. Yes, those are interesting topics, but it doesn't make a difference. Guys like Elon Musk, the corporate elite, they are pouring millions, billions into space travel or some sort of space movement. Okay, and this is precisely the breakaway civilization that Richard Dolan quoted. This is happening right before our eyes. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. These classes are changing. And, you know, this is really bringing about a socialistic order. And the New World Order has always been socialistic. But it's interesting to see how the finances are affected by this robotics movement. This robotics thing will change the financial sector in a way that I think, you know, part of the predictions about the crash, the financial crashes, all the stuff, I think that's true, but it's in light of the boom of artificial intelligence and these other highly unattainable sort of, you know, extra rich people, elite realms of finances. And so there's going to be a purging, if you will. A lot of companies that won't be able to keep up with the technological changes, they're all going to crash. Large companies, probably, lots of companies. And, you know, that's tied to the employment situation and everything else. And this is why it's going to be a socialist order, right? And, you know, I actually have a story here of someone admitting to that fact. Forbes.com. Bill Gross, since robots are taking over, guarantee income for everyone. That is socialism, ladies and gentlemen. And in fact, they're not even shy about it in the article. Quote, if more and more workers are going to be displaced by robots, then they will need money to live on. Will they not? Asks Gross. Quote, and if that strikes you as a form of socialism, I would suggest we get used to it. I'm not making this stuff up, folks. This is happening right before our eyes. We need to prepare spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically. This is going to happen very quickly, folks. You know, it's going to happen all around us very quickly. Think about how cell phones and smartphones have invaded our space. It happened very quickly. It happened very quietly. It happened very subtly. Yes, it's a great tool, but the internet, computers, all these things. I mean, I'm sitting on a computer now. It's everywhere, folks. But this robot side of things, again, I think have been greatly underestimated by many people. And I don't think a lot of society is ready for it. Entrepreneur.com. Robots may be on the cusp of widespread adoption, Jibo CEO says. This one's a little bit more sympathetic towards the robot. And, you know, you got your one-eyed robot here. Again, this is just ridiculous, right? Come on. The one-eyed robot, and it's got the, you know, crescent moon looking thing going on. I mean, come on, folks. I can't make this stuff up. All right. Entrepreneur.com says, robots get a bad rap. They steal our jobs. They can't always handle basic tasks. And sometimes they emulate the worst of human behavior. But society may be on the cusp of a major attitude change towards robots, much like the period of Nokia cell phones before the widespread adoption of smartphones, according to Jibo CEO Steve Chambers. Interesting that he would bring up smartphones as part of this. I just mentioned that, right? And how it's been intrusive to society. Okay, let me keep reading here. Previously, the idea of a robot personal assistant was a big if for the general public, but now Jibo founder and chief scientist Cynthia Brazial and Chambers say they have noticed people asking them different types of questions. People are saying, when will this happen? And specifically, when will we see robotics innovations in the home? Chambers said during a panel at Friday's third annual Startup Columbia Entrepreneurship Conference. This heightened curiosity is thanks in part to Brazial's research into the field of social robotics, which she embarked on at MIT in the 90s. And you can read the rest here. It talks about Star Trek and the whole thing. So again, sympathetic towards the robot, getting us ready for this revolution. Now, I wanted to include this story because I found it fascinating. Tech Insider had a story called Human-like Robots May Have a Disturbing Impact on Actual Humans. Researchers hailing from NASA to Google have invested in humanoid robots. There's the Dreamer robot that was acquired by Google turned Alphabet in 2013, and there's NASA's humanoid robot designed to help astronauts in space. We've covered those robots in the past here on the YouTube channel. If you dig around, you'll find them. And it says here, but one robotics expert is warning against the creation of humanoid robots, specifically those that closely resemble humans. Stuart Russell, vice chair of the World Economic Forum Council on Robotics and Artificial Intelligence, called for a, quote, ban of highly human-like humanoid robots, end quote, during the Milken Institute's panel titled Artificial Intelligence, Friend or Foe. Now, just as a side note, briefly, to mention this, I think this is evidence here that there are humans, just people who are part of these large organizations and these institutions. People always say, oh, how can a conspiracy happen, right? It's too big of a thing to hide. Well, we're looking at a spiritual conspiracy, not so much a physical one, especially at this point. And I think this is evidence that they're just people. There are a lot of people who are concerned about this from within. But, the powers within these movements, within these organizations is controlled, I think, by the enemy. And I think it's moving in that direction for a reason. And the other part of it is God is allowing it to happen because, number one, it's prophesied. Number two, it's the process by which God restores the heavens and the earth. So I wanted to throw that in there as a response to this guy, Stuart Russell, this vice chair at the World Economic Forum Council. I mean, that's a pretty prestigious and big time position. And he's saying, ban highly human-like robots, because there is something sacred about the human form, as I mentioned earlier. I had a Reuters article earlier. Here's another one. Rich and powerful warn robots are coming for your jobs. Just reiterating this point. Job loss is on the rise. Unemployment is going to skyrocket when robots start taking over a lot of the factories. It's just a point of fact. It's going to happen. And obviously, if you've been tracking anything in the political realm, with the campaign here, nobody is talking about this. This has not been brought up in any political forum, at least to my knowledge, at all. Why is this not being addressed? If the financial world, the entrepreneurial world, the tech world, they're all saying, hey guys, it's here. The robots are here. They're coming. And, here are the issues that we're going to face. Sociologists saying it, myself as just a watchman, I see this happening as well. Everyone's saying this is happening. The only people not talking about it are the people that actually have some sort of power to do something about it or control it or help facilitate it in some way. It's the political system. And of course, all of us have lost so much trust in the system, but this is why, because there's the elephant in the room, the big thing that's happening right in front of us, and the politicians are, just doing this theater thing, and it just makes me angry. Anyway, this just goes to show that, with the number of articles and the influx of articles on robotics and specifically these issues in the recent days, okay, not even months, days, this is evidence that this is really happening. And I think we need to start thinking about certain things regarding how to respond to this. DiscoverMagazine.com, How the Religious See Robots. This was an interesting article. It was produced in 2014 by Jeremy Sue. But I thought it was interesting. I wanted to include it in here for anyone, wanting to do some reading on some of these issues and what's been reported. Basically, the idea here is that, he uses the term fundamentalists regarding, religious people. And there's, categorical things that are interesting here in terms of how, Christianity and Catholicism and how they're categorized. I don't necessarily agree with. However, the point of the research was that someone who is, quote unquote, according to the author here, a fundamentalist or holds on to fundamentalist religious values, they tend to see humanoid robots as more disturbing than your non-fundamentalist person. Okay, so, it kind of proves the desensitization of the human mind, though, doesn't it? I mean, it's interesting because they try to pin it down on religion. They try to pin down like, oh, the religious folks, they're the problem because they see it a certain way. When in fact, it actually proves the exact opposite point, which is that, hey, we're imagers of God. When we see something that is abominable to us, to the human construct, like a human-like robot machine, because automatically with a human shape or form, there is a certain level of empathy, sympathy, these things that we experience as a person or entity that shares a common experience in, existence. So, there's obviously going to be that there. And when that's not there, when we know that it is an empty shell, right? Then we feel deceived. We're like, wait a minute, this form is, human. It's the thing I relate to. It's the thing that, I interact with. It's the thing that I experience life with. And now you're giving me this machine that might be really good at doing some particular tasks, okay? At that level, it's like, okay, whatever, robots can wash my clothes and I don't have to deal with laundry. Great, wonderful. That kind of stuff, whatever, the more mundane things. But when it comes to the philosophical and even the spiritual side of things, that gut reaction of a machine or a robot being something disturbing is, I think, inherent in humans. I don't think it's necessarily shaded all that much by personal experience in terms of, upbringing, location, geographically, what religion, what culture. I mean, yes, those things obviously have influence, but I think there is a deeper construct of the human being, which again is the bearing of the image of God that we were created in, not by attribute, but by inheritance, that we are created in the image of God. There is sacredness that is being corrupted here. And I think, again, we live in a generation where that sacredness was infiltrated and torn down through media, like my generation, the millennials, right? I'm considered a millennial. My childhood was filled with television shows and everything else, and robots were all over the place, okay? You got Small Wonder, you have all these Transformers. I mean, robots were everything. That was part of our upbringing. We saw robots from a very young age. So naturally, we ascribe some sort of intelligence to it or interactive capacity to it. And, if you really think about animation itself is one form of robotics. You have people, human minds, behind a mechanism that delivers a message, that delivers an experience that is not directly human, right? It's through a medium, which is, film, audio, visual sort of movement on the screen, things like that. Those aspects spoke something to the mind of the youth, to the mind of us, growing up, and it conditioned us to accept this new social order that's coming with the machine. And I see that as a larger blow to humanity in terms of its health. And I think we're seeing the turmoil of it. I think this is why, the pharmaceutical industry has been able to just abuse us by getting us hooked on all kinds of drugs. It's ridiculous. And obviously the control of illegal drug flow. This is all controlled as well, folks. This is part of the system to create a subculture, to be able to control all sides of the equation. Again, this is a spiritual deception. The nefarium goes deeper than the human or collective group of human. Yes, those are the ones that have been deceived into carrying out this dark spiritual agenda. But, the nefarium, as I call it, the intelligent evil that is behind this sort of movement, this huge cultural thing happening, with machine and all the philosophical things leading up to it, is very much at play here. And, it makes me sound like a robot hater. I'm not, okay? I'm not saying all robots are going to be evil or anything else. I'm just looking at it in how it impacts humanity, how it impacts the church, these sociological issues that we're going to face here. And last one, and perhaps the most creepy. Now, this was reported on Charisma News, which I know is a, kind of a Christian or, charismatic Christian publishing outlet. But the article states, sex with robots, Sodom and Gomorrah never dreamed of this immorality. And, basically it outlines other articles that are pretty much talking about sex with robots, some of the issues surrounding this whole thing. There was a Futurama episode that really outlined the potential, creepiness, I guess, of this reality. And even I've reported on this on a blog post talking about transhumanists. And I'm not going to get into it here, but some of the quotes coming from tech leaders of futurists and investors and high-level people in the technology sector saying what will come of sex in the singularity. And it's obviously pretty disturbing if you look at it. So I'm going to end it here, but that was 10 stories, guys, 10 published stories about this topic, most of them happening in the last few days. I think this whole thing obviously has been planned out by the Prince of the Power of the Air, indicating that on May 1st, a particular era of the New World Order system, if you will, ends with many of these churches, cathedrals burning down, and that movement towards this new age shifted onto the machine or the robot. Is it just rhetoric, or is this really happening right before our eyes? Are you guys ready for the robot revolution? Are you ready as parents to deal with a society, a culture where some of these things will start to manifest? Prayerfully consider these things and just know that God is with us. God is allowing this kind of thing to happen. As we continue to interact with the machine, let's be cautious about what we're doing, be alert and aware about what we're interacting with and how we are dealing with this revolution, again, spiritually, mentally, physically even, because all these wearable technologies is coming upon us too. For those of you who have been tracking with me but have been frustrated with people, not really paying attention to this kind of stuff, I hope you can share videos like this with them, because there's plenty of evidence here and it's not a scary thing. People often like to turn off things they don't understand or they're afraid of or whatever. It's nothing to be afraid of. Now remember, there's a passage in 1 Corinthians 10 that talks about how God would never allow people to be tempted beyond their ability. And, many people have said that, this passage indicates that God will never give more than you can handle or more than you can bear. That's a little bit different. I think it's a little bit off in that sense. It's more the fact that Paul is saying there is no temptation that can't be overcome with the power of God. And that's the truth. But also, I do think that generationally speaking, we are a generation that God has chosen to experience this type of change, this type of revolution in technology, in machine, in the robot. We are the chosen time period of the church to see this happen and to see this through. And, passages about endurance, about love. None of this is fruitful without love, right? It just really gives all the scriptures that we've known and been familiar with that much more weight in the climate and the culture that we're about to face in terms of the changes with the rise of the machine. So again, this is not something to fear, but this is a great opportunity that God has placed before us. So share this video, share other articles, either in the comment sections or with your friends and family. If you see stuff that adds to this discussion, obviously there's a lot of it out there. So pray up, put on the full armor of God. Have an awesome day. God bless.